Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD tonight. Looks like we've got a little bit of a smaller crowd than usual. It's kind of strange because I actually had one of our larger signups that we've had for a while, but it's summertime, and that's how these things go sometimes. I'll get through as many questions as I can tonight, and in fact, with a lower turnout, sometimes that means I can get through all of the questions. That does happen every now and then, although it's not that common. And as you know, many of you may know from being here before, I can be a bit long-winded at times, but we'll get through as many questions as possible. For those of you that are new here, welcome. And those of you that are coming back again, I'm glad to see some familiar names here tonight. The way that you create this webinar, because you actually create it with your questions, is to write those questions. And you can do that by writing your questions in the chat box that is over on the right-hand side of the screen. Down at the bottom. I request that as you write your question, though, that you only hit the enter key one time. Each time that you hit enter actually it sends a different question my way, and it gets to be a little bit difficult to manage. We'll spend about an hour and a half tonight, or until I poop out. Sometimes I poop out before that hour and a half, but generally I make it through the whole hour and a half. And tomorrow you will get a recording. So yes, I am doing a recording as usual tonight. And in the morning, usually around 6:30 in the morning, Seattle time, I do send out an email notifying everyone that the recording is ready with information about how you can watch that recording as well too. So that is being handled tonight too. Also in that email tomorrow, you can sign up for next week's webinar. At the end of the webinar tonight, I will actually redirect you back to treatlyme.net where you did sign up for the webinar, and you'll be able to sign up there tonight as well too. So I hope I'm able to help any of you here, all of you here, actually improve your treatment. Sometimes the questions that somebody else asks is something that actually can help you too. All right. So during the webinar tonight, I'm going to be reading the questions out loud, and also for those of you that are participating live, you're going to be able to see the questions as they post up on the screen. For those of you that are watching the recorded version tomorrow, or if I ever get around to actually doing podcast versions, I will be reading that question. Okay. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. All right. Hello, Victoria. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I'm up to 19 drops each of Cemento and Banderol. I have 0 HERC symptoms, hardly any symptoms at all. Is it working? Also, Countin says to drink 3 liters of water a day or the herbs won't work. Is that true? Thanks for everything. So everyone, Cemento and Banderol are 2 herbal medicine products that are manufactured by a company called NutriMedics. And Cemento is cat's claw. Banderol is something called a tobabark extract. About 2010, there's a researcher that's doing some of the best research in the country right now on Lyme disease, is coming out of a lab in New Haven, Connecticut, that is run by a PhD named Eva Chapi. That's SAPI. And I work with a lot of things that I learned from her. But in 2010, she published a paper that looked at treating Lyme disease on Petri dishes and observing what worked the best at getting at all 3 forms of the germ, as well as removing biofilms. And in that project, she looked at these products by NutriMedics, Cemento and Banderol, and she was able to show that on Petri dish experiments that these 2 herbs worked well individually, but when you put them together, they got a cooperative or synergistic kill. They worked much better than you would expect each of them to work just by their added effect. So they help each other. And in fact, they wiped out 100% of biofilm. Now, many of you know that earlier this week, I sent out an email updating the article that I have written about how to do biofilm treatments, and also included another piece of information from Eva Chapi about stevia for biofilms. But even stevia does not work as well as what Banderol Cemento do. According to her research, Banderol Cemento probably is the strongest thing that we can do for biofilm removal. Okay. So based on her research, I decided to try it out in humans, because what goes on in Petri dish doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to happen in us. And what I observed is that these 2 herbs together work effectively about 85 to 90% of the time. And that is the same as what I see with any antibiotic combination, all right? Any prescription antibiotic combination. In other words, these work as well as prescription antibiotics. Now, these two herbs are also included in something called the Cowden protocol. And Dr. Cowden has people do a bunch of stuff and a bunch of other herbs too. And to be honest with you, I don't care for much of the Cowden protocol. I don't think it really works that well, but there are some things that do. And the Banderol Cemento do. And I don't use them the way Dr. Cowden recommends. So Dr. Cowden, for instance, in his protocol, recommends that you take your Banderol Cemento about 15 minutes apart, and that they each have to sit in water by themselves for 15 minutes. I find no benefit in doing that. So I have my patients actually take their Banderol Cemento together. You can actually take them with other medicines or other supplements at the same time. The only thing that I do, though, is I ask my patients to take them on an empty stomach without food. By that I mean without food. You can take it with medicines and supplements, though, okay? And so what I mean without food is that you have to stop them 30 minutes before food, and you can start taking them again about 2 hours after food, okay? So it seems to be that taking them with food will interfere with how they work. I don't agree with Dr. Cowden that you have to drink that much water for this to work, because I actually don't have any requirements on water intake. I will tell you, though, that for detox purposes, a good level of water that can support detox is to take your body weight in pounds and divide that in half. So a 150-pound person divided in half is 75, and to have that many ounces of water a day. That's a good amount for detox purposes. But even so, even though I recommend that for detox purposes, I still don't require my patients to do anything with water, and they still get really well using the Banderol Cemento, okay? So again, Cemento's cat's claw. Banderol is an extract from a tree called the Atoba tree, and I like these two herbs. They're my favorite two herbs to use to treat Lyme. They work for a variety of situations. And there's something you can do on your own without having to have somebody prescribe it for you too, all right? One more thing about herxing that I would just want to say. So you don't have to herx to get well. In fact, in my experience, whether we're using prescription antibiotics or whether we're using herbal antibiotics, about 90% of people will get herxes and 10% do not. And if you're one of those 10%, you're sometimes left wondering, is it working? But they can work without herxing, okay? So I would try to work your way up to the 30 drops twice a day. And just the fact that you're not herxing doesn't mean anything about whether it is or is not working too, okay? All right. Good luck to you, Victoria, and thank you for that question. All right, let's see here. Hello, Kathy. How to manage nerve pain? Hold on here, just a minute. I'm gonna have a sip of water. Okay, so nerve pain is due. So first of all, in terms of nerve pain, treat your infection. Treat the infection that is affecting your nerve. So if you're treating Lyme, treat Lyme. Make sure you don't have a co-infection that can give nerve pain as well. And the most common one would be Bartonella. If you're wondering if you have Bartonella, you don't really have to do testing to figure it out. You can figure it out based on symptoms. And I have a list of symptoms that you'll find in an article called It Could Be Bartonella or Babesia, the Signs and Symptoms. And in there, I list out the symptoms of Bartonella that I use. I don't believe in doing Bartonella testing because there's an estimated 30 strains of Bartonella. We're only good about testing for 2 strains. So I'm going to design my treatments based on what the clinical picture looks like, okay? So, but nerve pain can sometimes be part of Bartonella. So make sure you're treating the right infections, okay? Number 2, lower inflammation. And you need to lower inflammation from a group of chemicals called cytokines. Now, many of you that have listened to my webinars from week to week know I talk about cytokines a lot. So I'm going to do a brief discussion of them right now. So cytokines are inflammation chemicals that are made by white blood cells when they see an infection. And they're good and they're bad. On the good side, they turn the immune system on to fight Lyme or to fight any infection, or even get rid of toxins, because they're made when you have toxins in you too. However, in Lyme and some people with their toxin illness and in some people with too many yeast, the immune system doesn't do a good job, and it keeps trying harder and harder. And eventually it makes too many cytokines. And too many cytokines basically give you all your Lyme symptoms. So fatigue, hard time thinking, body pain, etc. I could go through the whole list of Lyme symptoms. Those are really excess cytokine symptoms, okay? All right, so you need to lower cytokines to lower inflammation, pain, and nerve pain. And what I like to use for that is curcumin. And curcumin is a component of turmeric, and you take 500 milligrams 3 times a day. You want to use a liposomal variety. And what I mean by liposomal is a variety of curcumin that's microscopically wrapped in fat. You want it microscopically wrapped in fat because that helps increase the absorption of it, okay? And a product I like using is a product made by Thorne called Mariva 500. It's microscopically wrapped in fat. That's why I choose to use that product, okay? So number one, treat your infections. Make sure you're treating the right infections. Lyme, make sure if you have Bartonella, or consider whether you might have Bartonella. Number two, lower inflammation with curcumin. Number three, work with an antioxidant that repairs things, okay? So every one of our cells has a reparative, restorative antioxidant in it called glutathione. Glutathione is a very powerful antioxidant. It fixes things. Other things that glutathione does is it helps detox. It's the main chemical used by the liver to detox things out. And as a very powerful antioxidant, it talks to white blood cells and lowers oxidizing agents that trigger cytokines. So glutathione is also a good anti-cytokine agent as well too, all right? And there's two ways that I like working with glutathione. You can either give glutathione, and you can do that either by IV, you can do it orally, or you can do it by breathing treatments, or a cheaper way of doing it is to give the building block. And one of the main building blocks for glutathione is something called N-acetylcysteine, also called NAC. 500 milligrams 3 times a day will build glutathione. The other option would be to take glutathione, and an oral version I like is a product called Trifortify Orange. It's glutathione microscopically wrapped in fat. And you want to do 5 milliliters of that 1 time a day, okay? So number one, treat your germs. Number two, lower cytokines. Number three, use glutathione, okay? Number four, you want to go and repair the covering of the nerves, which also repairs the covering of the energy factories found in every one of our cells called mitochondria. And you can almost assume if you have nerve pain, you have injury to the energy factories in those nerve cells called mitochondria too. They go together, okay? And so you want to rebuild the covering of the mitochondria by giving the fats that make up the covering of the mitochondria, which are the same fats that make up your nerve coverings. And so you use something called NT factor. It's a supplement called NT factor. It's a mix of these fats that make up the covering of the nerves. And I like people to start at 2 pills 3 times a day and do that for 2 months. And then after 2 months, you cut it down to 1 pill 3 times a day for an additional 4 months, okay? Now, that's the way I recommend to do things, okay? And I'm going to do a quick screen share here because I wanted to show you something you can look at later about this. All right, so I'm in the Treat Lyme books now, the website called the Treat Lyme book. This is the home page, okay? And I'm going to look under the chapters tab here. And in the chapters tab, there is a section, an area that I call problem solved. You can see them right up here. There's 2 columns for that. And this is basically the section, the chapters that look at specific problems. So you would take a look at this chapter called Brain and Nerves. All right, and in here is an article called Lyme Disease Nerve Damage, okay? And it literally goes through everything that I just talked about, all right? Now, one of the things that I just want to point out that you could look at later is an article that I have in this chapter on glutathione. And the reason I want to point this glutathione article out to you, although I just talked about oral ways of raising glutathione, in this article I give you greater detail about IV administration or breathing treatment administration as well too, okay? So take a look at that to get more information later on. Here's an article on the NT factor that I was just talking about to rebuild the covering of the nerve cells and your mitochondria as well too, okay? So that's some more information for you to take a look at later in the Treat Lyme book, okay? All right, let me go back here. All right. So, Kathy, I hope that gives you some information. Okay, so treat your infections, use curcumin. You want to use the restorative, reparative antioxidant called glutathione. And the fourth thing is repair the cell membrane and also the mitochondrial membrane using the NT factor. All right. Good luck to you. And thank you for that question, too. All right, moving on here. Let's see. Hello, Jean. Let's see. What would you take if your ammonia levels in your blood work are high? So ammonia can be a substance that builds up, especially if you're having liver detox problems, actually. And if it's of the level of elevation that you're seeing it in the blood, there's actually a prescription medicine that I like using called K-exalate. It actually binds up the ammonia in the intestine so it can't be absorbed, okay? So that's what I would wind up using there. At lower levels, the kind that probably aren't going to show up that much in your blood work, there are actually a couple supplements you can use, and I'm blanking on them right now. I can tell you where you can find it. There's a physician named Jernigan. Jernigan runs a detox clinic out of Kansas, David Jernigan, and he writes about ammonia. So Google ammonia and Jernigan. The only reason I'm telling you to do it that way is I am literally blanking on the name of the other two supplements you can use. You'll find references to it on his site. Okay, I'm sorry about that. It happens every now and then. Even to me, it does happen. So anyhow, there you go. And good luck with that. Okay. All right. Let's see. Looks like we got that one handled earlier. All right, let's see. This is another one from Gene. I don't know if it's the same Gene or not, but I'll take this one. All right, so if you have hereditary hypercoagulation lipoprotein in Lyme, what is the best course of action? All right, so one thing that can happen in Lyme disease, everyone, is as a result of having chronic infection, it can sometimes promote hypercoagulation, or in other words, and specifically what happens is it promotes the formation of a blood clotting protein called fibrin, or fibrinogen, which is turned into fibrin. And so when you get this extra amount of fibrin in the bloodstream, it thickens the blood and makes it so it's going to have a harder time flowing into the small blood vessels that go deep into your muscles or deep into your skin or deep into your nerves, okay? So one thing that I will do at times, if I've got a patient that's not getting better, or I got a patient with a lot of muscle cramps, so muscle cramping pain sometimes can indicate you're not having good blood flow, is I'm going to start wondering about hypercoagulation. Now, there's some testing you can do for that, or you can just treat empirically. And what I like to treat with for hypercoagulation is to use a group of enzymes that break down the fibrin. And that is a lumber kinase. Lumber kinase is a group of enzymes that come from the skin of earthworms, actually. Yep, we get to use earthworms in this disorder. Many of you may know that I also talk about lumber kinase because it helps break down biofilms. So biofilms are layers of slime that can cover Lyme germs. And a biofilm is made up of a mucopolysaccharide sugar slime that is held together in a protein matrix, which is made up of the fibrin, okay? So lumber kinase can break down biofilms, but it can also thin sticky blood or hypercoagulable blood. And for that, I like using lumber kinase. It comes as a 20 milligram pill, and you would do one pill twice a day. The thing about lumber kinase, you want to make sure that you take it on an empty stomach and without other medicines or supplements, because otherwise the enzyme will actually digest those other substances as well too. And so the way that you use it is I have people take it on an empty stomach by 1 hour either side of taking it. And what I mean by on 1 hour either side is Don't stop everything, including food and supplements, 1 hour before you take it, and then you can resume using those 1 hour after you take it. Okay. All right. In addition, depending on the other type, the underlying hereditary hypercoagulation, they may have already told you, depending on what kind of hypercoagulation disorder you have, to be on prescription blood thinners like Coumadin, or some of the newer heparin-like medicines. I would continue taking those in addition to using a lumbar kinase. I would actually use the two together, actually. Okay? All right. Those are my thoughts. Good luck to you. Hello, Catherine. Let's see. Hello, I have relapsing fever. Is the treatment the same as with Lyme? Very few doctors in Canada are Lyme literate. I need help. I finished my antibiotics a few weeks ago, and now I'm taking Benicar in the Marshall protocol. I would like to learn how to detox myself from yeast and co-infection. All right. Oh, I think there's a second part to your question too. You say, I was diagnosed far too late, about a year after the bite. I'm off work and cannot cope. Advice. Okay, so I treat relapsing fever, which is a caused by a tick. It's a tick-borne infection as well too. I treat it with the same protocols that I use to treat Lyme. And I don't find the Marshall protocol to be helpful, to be quite honest with you. I think these infections, the spirochetal infections, Borrelia, actually exist in a number of different forms. The Marshall will only deal with one form, which is intracellular. I don't think it's going to deal adequately with spirochetal illness or with cyst forms of germs, and I don't find it helpful in these kind of situations. So if your doctors have stopped treating you and you're still symptomatic, you may need to look at resuming the kind of things you would do to treat the Lyme infection. Find somebody who can prescribe, come across the border to get those prescriptions if you need to, but you probably need to be on antibiotics still if you're symptomatic, okay? I'm not quite sure where you want to go with that yeast and detox co-infection. What I would point out is that I have in the Treat Lyme book, there's a whole chapter on yeast. In the Treat Lyme book, there is a chapter called Infection Treatment Plans, where you can find information about treating Bartonella and Babesia. In the Treat Lyme book, there's a chapter on how to diagnose, so you might want to look there about information I have about how to diagnose other infections. And there's also a chapter in there called Detoxification. Catherine, I would take a look there to get more information about some of these other things you wanted me to talk about, okay? All right. Good luck to you, and thank you for that question. Hello, Suzanne. Let's see. I've recently been diagnosed with chronic Lyme, with the probability I've had it for upwards to 40 years. IV care is currently cost prohibitive. I'm wondering what advice you might have for someone such as myself. Okay, so Lyme, just so you know, can mean a lot of things. Okay, so it can mean you have impaired thinking from Lyme, or it can mean that your brain is so involved that you've lost the use of an arm or a leg. You're not getting their neurologic signals down there. Okay. So, and most people, even if you haven't had Lyme for 40 years, if you've had it for 2 years, are going to have a degree of Lyme, meaning that they're going to have a hard time thinking. It goes with the illness, okay? But if you, depending on the severity, and I guess I don't get to know that here, whenever anyone has problems with neurologic Lyme, a lot of neurologic impairment, one thing I always want to make sure at the beginning of treatment is to rule out, to make sure you don't have the co-infection called Bartonella as part of it, all right? Bartonella can give a lot of neurologic dysfunction. And so things to consider, and I mentioned earlier, you might want to look into how to diagnose chapter, but in terms of Bartonella, I don't do testing, I look at symptoms. So symptoms that can suggest Bartonella are significant cognitive thinking impairment, okay? Pain on the soles of the feet is another one. Having a lot of anxiety or depression can be one. Having increase in daytime sweating. Having a lot of hypersensitivities, neurologic hypersensitivities like sound sensitivity, light sensitivity, touch sensitivity. Those are things that make me think about it. Bladder issues, people can have a very irritable bladder, meaning they have burning on urination or they have to pee frequently. That can be part of Bartonella. Also having restless legs. Seizure disorders can be part of it. And sometimes having an internal sense of buzzing or an internal tremor where no one else can see it, but you have that sense. Those are things that make me wonder about Bartonella, okay? Then you want to make sure that you're using antibiotics that are going to get into the brain. And so if you take a look at the article I wrote in the infection treatment plan chapter, it's called Lyme disease antibiotics, I think is what it's called. I lay out the way that you build a Lyme disease treatment. And one of the concepts that I raise in that article, and I'll show it to you here in a little bit, is the idea of IV equivalent antibiotics, meaning antibiotics that you can use that work as strong and as well as IV antibiotics, all right? And so there's IV antibiotics, all right? And then the other thing you can do is butt muscle injections of a form of penicillin called bicillin. And you do those about 3 times a week. They can be cost prohibitive too. They can run about $600 a month. But then my favorite way of doing a treatment that works as strong as IV antibiotics is to do very, very high doses of the oral antibiotic called amoxicillin. And that's if you're not allergic to penicillins, okay? And what I mean by very, very high doses is amoxicillin, we'll use it for throat infections or ear infections. We're going to dose it at 500 milligrams 3 times a day. But when you use it at really, really high doses, the idea is that you take a really strong oral dose so that it gets into the bloodstream, so that there's enough in your bloodstream that it will force its way into the brain tissues, okay? Or force its way into any tissues. And that's to take not 500 milligrams 3 times a day, but to take 2,000 milligrams 3 times a day or 1,500 milligrams 3 times a day. All right. Now, who I got this idea from is a colleague of mine out in New York State, a guy named Ken Liegner. Dr. Liegner has a practice that has a lot of people with multiple sclerosis Lyme in it. And this is a regimen he finds to be very helpful. I've probably used this regimen now for about 5 or 6 years, and I find it can be a great alternative to IV antibiotics. I've used it on patients of mine with multiple sclerosis Lyme when their IV antibiotics didn't work and had this work, for instance, okay? So it's a reasonable way to treat. It's amoxicillin, if your insurance does not want to cover it, is generally a lower cost antibiotic. If you have penicillin allergies, an alternative to to doing that would be to use something called cefuroxime. Normally we use 500 milligrams 2 times a day, but if you're going to do high dose, I would do 1,000 milligrams 2 times a day. But my favorite still is if you can use the amoxicillin, is to use it. And yes, at that high of a dose. I don't find any toxicity issues with it. I don't find any kidney or liver problems develop with it. And I thought everyone probably get diarrhea on it, to be honest with you, but no one gets diarrhea on it either, okay? So I would do that high dose amoxicillin, which treats the cell, the spirochete version of Lyme by attacking the cell wall, okay, of the spirochete. But as many of you know, Lyme doesn't just exist in the spirochete form, which is that thing you've seen on the internet before. It's a corkscrew-looking thing. It also can lose its covering and move inside of cells, and it can exist as a microscopic cyst form. So also, you're going to want to use other antibiotics that can get into the brain, but also treat intracellular Lyme and the cyst form of the germ. And so what I like using to get across the brain in terms of treating intracellular Lyme is a tetracycline called minocycline. There's also doxycycline, but minocycline is more fat soluble, and meaning it dissolves in fat. And this thing that keeps chemicals out of our brain is called the blood-brain barrier. It's made up of a lot of fat. So minocycline can get in there. That's 100 milligrams twice a day. And then you need to treat the cyst form of your Lyme germ, a microscopic cyst form of the germ. You can use prescription tinidazole, or you can use something called Flagyl, or you could use rifampin, or you could use grapefruit seed extract. Those are all reasonable ways too, all right? Let me show you the article that I have about how you design a Lyme antibiotic treatment, just so you can take a look at it later. And it is one of the articles that is one of the free articles. You can find it in the free reads chapter up here, or you can find it in the infection treatment plans chapter here. And I just recently renamed it. It's called a Lyme disease antibiotic guide. It's this article here. And if you take a look, I think I have it in the free reads chapter. Yep, it's in the free reads chapter. Yep, okay. So anyhow, I talk about needing to combine the background section. You need to combine antibiotics to treat all forms of the germ. That's where I talk about the 3 forms up here. And then down here in this special considerations, I talk about IV versus oral antibiotics and IV equivalent treatments, okay? So if you scan through here, you're going to see I describe every kind of antibiotic that you can use to treat Lyme. And then I talk about what they do specifically. And then down here, I give you some sample regimens of how you build a Lyme treatment. And then further down in the article, I talk about this idea of IV equivalent treatments here, this point number 4, okay? So again, this is one of the free articles that we have, and you can take a look at that later and gives you some good ideas, okay? I think it gives you good ideas. One of the things I have not yet added to that article is the information I have about treating using stevia that I published earlier this week. Stevia, the plant-based sweetener you can use to remove biofilms. It may also treat a type of Lyme called persister Lyme, which is Lyme after you've been on antibiotics for a while has the ability to become tolerant to the antibiotics, meaning it's not resistant, but they just don't work on the germ anymore. And it has something to do with the germ stops growing, basically. And so if you, with regular antibiotics, if you stop them for a period of time, the germ will go back into a growth state again. So that's one way to treat persister Lyme. But stevia on these Petri dish experiments seem to be able to treat persister cells as well, too. And can do quite a good job of that. Now, they're Petri dish experiments, and I'm still not clear if that is something that's going to work well in humans, even though I published an article about it. But you'll find the article on stevia in a chapter called Anti-Germs. You can also find the article about stevia in the biofilms chapter. I put it in both of those places. In the next week, you're going to see a couple articles published by me. I've already done the research on them. I just got to sit down and write them. One is on persister cells. Another article will be published on what to do about persister Lyme. And what I mean by persister Lyme is it's Lyme that has persister cells, but also Lyme that probably has moved more into biofilm communities and Lyme that has moved into microscopic cyst forms too. So there'll be an article about that. And then finally, I'm going to be publishing an article based on the recent research of Dr. Horowitz using a medicine we use for leprosy called dapsone. And dapsone seems to have some benefit against persister Lyme, at least according to the research that he has done. Okay, so in the next week to week and a half, it's going to be over that time frame, watch for another email from me where you're going to see information about these concepts and new articles that I'm putting together for the Treat Lyme book. All right. All right, there you go. Good luck with you. And again, I would take a look at that high dose amoxicillin. It can really do a nice job and can be an IV equivalent treatment too. Okay? All right. All right, Catherine, let's see. Oh, we already answered part of that earlier. Hello, Sybil. Let's see. Lately, I felt the need to sleep for 12 to 15 hours at a time. Is this okay? It can be okay. It may be just what your body is needing to repair. But the other thing I would be careful about is maybe reviewing your medications to make sure that something as a side effect isn't causing you to be drowsy. So, for instance, at this point in time, do you need as much of your sleep medicines as you used to? Okay, so I would review your medications, make sure that you're not on anything that is sedating, sleep causing is part of what it does. The other thing I would look into, Sybil, is making sure that you have adequate thyroid and adequate adrenals, and where you can take a look at information about that. Let me just go ahead and show you here. I'm going to do a screen share. All right, I'm going to go back into our website called the Treat Lyme book. And what I'm going to have you take a look at is my Lyme disease treatment guideline. And many of you are familiar with this. It's called the Successful Treatment Recipe. Basically, it's all the key steps you should do throughout a Lyme disease treatment to recover, okay? So poisoning your germs with antibiotics isn't enough. There's other things you need to do to support your cell, and the successful treatment recipe addresses every one of those. So one of those is make sure you're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep, okay, at nighttime. I give you some ideas on how to do that. Number 2, I like to have people be on a good paleo type diet, and I talk about that diet here. Number 3, make sure you lower cytokines, and this is part of this treatment recipe. Number 4, be on an herb that helps you deal with stress. And then here's what I'm trying to get to, is this section in the Lyme disease treatment guideline on hormones, okay? Read through this. I talk here about how do you figure out if you have low adrenals and what you do for them. And I also talk about low thyroid and how you figure out if you have low thyroid, and then what you can do about that too, okay? So down here are the symptoms of low thyroid, down here are the symptoms of low adrenals. Take a look at this section. This will give you some information to consider as to why you might be sleeping so much, okay? All right, let me go back here. All right, good luck to you, Sybil, and thank you for that question. All right, let's see here. Hello, Linda. Can you talk about treating Lyme with stevia? Doses and how often, and if herxing is extreme? So the dosing is interesting. There's not a prescribed way of dosing the stevia. And I got to be honest with you, I'm just recently started using it, so I'm still learning. At this point, what I'm having people do is start at 1 drop twice a day and increase every other day by 1 drop until they're taking 5 drops 2 times a day. I don't know for sure if it's going to be successful. I have some concerns about whether it's adequately absorbed out of the intestinal tract to actually do the things suggested in Eva Choppe's research. Okay, so again, her research showed that it can treat persister cells, and her research also showed that it can break apart biofilm. But I did include it because it is some cutting edge research. And as I wrote in that article, I said I'll be reporting back to you over time. Maybe we need to go ahead and even increase it to higher doses. But for right now, I'm working to target people at 5 drops of it 2 times a day. I have not seen extreme herxing, but the reason that I have people start at 1 drop twice a day is I want to try to avoid that for right now, as I get some comfort in using this herb as well too. Okay? All right. Linda, thank you for that question. Hello, Emily. See, I know you suggest a paleo diet for patients, but beyond that, do you believe that there are any other general rules, i.e. no vinegar, no mushrooms, etc. beyond that? No, here's the thing. I like the paleo diet that I recommend, which you can find it. I'll show everyone where you can find it. It's a paleo diet that I got from the Institute for Functional Medicine. It's published with their permission. I'm not stealing it and republishing, but it's something that's free. And I give you materials on my website about how you can build that diet for yourself. So the reason I like a paleo diet is a few things. So paleo diet, everyone, basically means you're not having grains, okay? And it's a diet that is rich in protein, rich in fat. The paleo diet that I like recommending is called the Mito Food Plan. It has a calorie distribution that is 20% carbs, 20% protein, and 60% fat. Okay, so you're getting a lot of fat. Now, the reason I like it is that kind of a diet supports mitochondria function, which is the powerhouses of our cells, all right? And most people with Lyme are going to have some degree of power factory dysfunction. The other thing this type of diet does is support your nerves. And we all know there's a degree of neurocognitive thinking impairment that happens in Lyme. Also built into the Mito Food Plan that I recommend is fasting. And one of the most basic ways that you can fast is not eat for 12 hours at least 4 times a day. So have your dinner and then don't eat until breakfast time, 12 hours later, okay? And what that does is that increases a chemical called brain-derived neurotropic growth factor, which literally helps you grow new nerve connections. Even when you have damaged nerves, you can re-get these nerves to connect together. And the fasting that's built into this diet, the Mito Food Plan, can help you with that, all right? The other reason I like the Mito Food Plan is it is low in sugar, and therefore you're not going to feed your yeast. And finally, a lot of your calories are coming from taking fruits and vegetables, actually, okay? And in that food plan, I tell you how many servings of fruit and vegetables. Most of it's going to be vegetables. And those vegetables are rich in antioxidants that help with detox, okay? And also rich in fiber that help with detox. So it's a great detox diet. It's great for preventing yeast. It's great for promoting good brain health and nerve health. And it's great for improving the function of your energy factories, all right? That's why I recommend it. It doesn't include gluten, and therefore it's not inflammatory. And so that's what I do. In terms of, do I think you need to avoid other things? Generally, no. I don't think so. I think it's a pretty good, well-rounded diet. Now, some people have food sensitivities or food allergies. And if you have those, then you can just remove those things from the Mito Food Plan, all right? So let me go ahead and show you where you're going to find this diet that I'm talking about. All right, so I'm going to look up here in the free reads. And in the free reads is this diet. It's called the best brain inflammation, pain, energy, and detox diet ever. Yeah, those are a lot of words to describe it, but I really mean all those things. I think it does a great job, okay? And in here, you're going to see I actually have 3 videos. One that introduces it, and then 2 that tell you how you can use the tools here to figure out how many calories and food servings you're supposed to have a day, as well as figure out how you break that into the actual proteins and nuts and seeds and fats that you would have as well too. Okay, so this is a good thing, and it really, I walk you through the steps on how you use the materials here to build your own diet. So I would take a look at this. This is really a strong diet. It's a diet I use myself for the most part. You know, I'm like anyone. I actually do break from the diet periodically. Not that I'm glad that I break from it periodically. Every now and then I will go for some carbs, but I find I do better if I'm on this diet in terms of how I feel overall. And it's a very practical, and you'll see when you get into it, it's actually a very doable diet. Once you get the hang of it, it's a very doable diet. So I would recommend that. And no, I don't really have any other restrictions that I recommend, Emily, beyond those things that I recommend there. Okay. All right. All right, let's see. This next question is from Laura. And hold on, everyone. I just got to look at something here. All right. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I tested my HVAC and found Aspergillus and my gliotoxin derivative is present on real-time labs. I am in the process of fixing this. Can Aspergillus penicillin cause similar symptoms of Lyme? Weakness, dizziness, depersonalization. I've been treating for a year. Let me see. I think there might be a wandering second part to your question here. Bear with me a minute. But Laura, if there was a second part, I don't see it. Let me look one more spot. I think I have enough here to be able to answer that. Let me repost it. All right, so as you know, so yes, mold toxin illness can look identical to Lyme. All right, they can look the same. And here's why. So as you know, tonight earlier, I talked about Lyme disease symptoms actually being symptoms of too many cytokines, okay? So having cytokine excess, having too many of these inflammation chemicals made by the immune system can give you most of the Lyme symptoms. It can actually give, and too many toxins in you actually trigger too many cytokines too. So yeah, they can look a lot alike, okay? And they can both, you know, Lyme and mold toxin illness can give you the weakness, dizziness, and the depersonalization, okay? Now, everyone, gliotoxin is a what Laura may be referring to here is gliotoxin is a lab. There's a lab out of Texas called Real Time Labs that has urine testing to see if you're peeing out toxins. And there's 4 toxins that it tests for. One is called aflatoxin, another one called ochratoxin, trichosethine. Trichosethine is black mold toxin, and then gliotoxin. And gliotoxin can come from Aspergillus and some other molds, but also gliotoxin can come from yeast. Okay, so if you have too many yeast in your intestines, your gliotoxin can come from that. So Laura, one thing you ought to make sure is that you don't have too many yeast. And to figure out if you have too many yeast, I have some useful tools on how to do that. One place that you might want to start is take a look at the my treatment protocol, the successful treatment recipe. In there is a section on yeast and a screening tool you can use to figure out if you might have too many yeast in the intestines. Okay. There also is a whole chapter on yeast that I have about how do you treat yeast if you have too many yeast. But the one thing I would say to you, Laura, is make sure you don't have too many yeast. Okay. The other thing about getting rid of the yeast or these toxins, you may need to bind them up. And the article that I have about binders and ways that you can get rid of your toxins that are in you is called Mold and Lyme Toxin Illness. I believe that's what it's called. Let me go ahead and do a screen share here and take a look at it. All right. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to look at the chapter. And I'm going to look at the chapter on detoxification. And in this chapter is an article, it's called Lyme and Mold Toxins, okay? Take a look at this. I talk about the binders that you might want to use and how it can be helpful to get those toxins out. Gliotoxin was not out when I recorded this one. For the gliotoxin, I usually like to make sure that I've treated yeast first to make sure that I'm getting rid of the internal source of gliotoxin for some people. Okay? All right. Let me go back here. All right. Good luck to you, Laura. All right. Let's see here. Looks like I've got a question that was posted twice. Let me just get rid of that. Let's see, Chris. Let's see. This isn't a clinical question, but how do you suggest dealing with people who, I think you mean don't understand? It says diet, but I think you mean don't understand. It's a hard one. So I know a lot of people, friends, family sometimes start wondering if it's all in your head. It's not, but it's a real illness. There's two things I'd have people take a look at, and it's just so they can see it. One is the documentary called Under Our Skin. I think Under Our Skin does a great job of showing the ramifications and the reality and the realness of this illness. Now, granted, Under Our Skin shows some of the extreme situations, okay? But you can find it. You'll probably find it on Amazon. You might find it on Netflix. Just Google Under Our Skin. You should be able to find it, okay? That's one thing, is have them sit and watch it. The other thing that is a useful resource about the politics and the complexity of Lyme is a book that was written by Pamela Weintraub. It's Weintraub. And the book is called Cure Unknown. It's about Lyme disease, about the politics of Lyme disease, and about the reality of Lyme disease. It is a reasonably good read. Pamela has Lyme or had Lyme. I think she might say she had Lyme at this point. She writes about her story, so I'm not saying anything. I'm not disclosing anything that's not public knowledge. But Pamela used to be the executive editor, I believe, of either Science or Discover magazine, one of the science magazines. And so when she looked at doing the book, this Cure Unknown book, she looked at it from a viewpoint of a journalist that did not try to bring a bunch of biases into it, and one that can actually has understanding of how science works, okay? So I think she did a nice job of looking at the politics behind Lyme. But I would start by having your family members take a look at Under Our Skin and sit with them. Let them mull it over a little bit, okay? All right. Good luck to you, Chris. All right. Hello, Bradley. Hold on here a minute. I got to take a sip of water. All right. Let's see. Hello, Dr. Ross. I've been taking antibiotics for the last year, and it has brought my CD57 numbers from 20 to 65. I have been taking NAC, magnesium malate, coenzyme Q10, alpha lipoic acid, acetyl L-carnitine, and vitamin C. Since my CD57 went up, I started taking Banderol and Cemento and immediately herxed. Now, what I wonder, Bradley, is if there's a second part here. Hold on. Aha, there is. Your second part was any tips on treatment. Okay, so let me go back to your main question, okay? So everyone, with this question, Bradley wants to know if I have any tips on treatment. So I'm going to give you a bunch of comments, all right? So I don't know, with that CD57 of 20 and 65, it may or may not mean any real change. I'm sorry to say that, but so the way that so everyone, CD57 is a type of white blood cell that is low about 80% of the time that somebody has Lyme. There is one other known cause of it to be low, and that is HIV infection. However, I think there may be other causes. It could be virus infections, chronic virus infections, and other things might cause it to be low. So if it comes back low, it doesn't prove you have Lyme, but it is low 80% of the time in Lyme, all right? Now, there have been some studies done about when you get a value back, what does it mean, all right? So most of us think that a number of 150 or lower is on the low side, is low, all right? But there's studies that show that number you get is actually could be 30% lower up to 30% higher than the reported value, okay? So let's look at this. So 30% of 65, bear with me because I'm actually going to calculate this out. If I can find my calculator, hold on here, where is that? Okay, so roughly 30% of 65 is 20, okay? So roughly, all right? So that 65 could really be all the way down to 45, all right? Okay, all right. And then that 20 could be actually 30% higher. So that 20 could be all the way up to about 27, all right? So 27 versus 45, okay, that represents real improvement. The point I wanted to make, though, is you can't just look at the number. You got to realize it can be 30% higher or lower. So some people get really frustrated thinking that their number is, some people will see that their number goes down, but if it's within that 30%, it doesn't mean it changed at all. That's the big point I want you to get, okay? The other thing I want to let you know is I know a number of my colleagues will test CD57s as a means of seeing if they're getting improvement. And I don't think there's any utility in that and usefulness. And here's why. There's been studies done that show that throughout the course of treatment, your CD57 will oscillate up and down over an average number. And it isn't until you're done with treatment that if it's going to improve, that it will rocket up fast into normal range, okay? So it can go up and down. This just may be the normal up and down that it's going to do. Beyond the 30% variation I was talking about, this just may be the kind of normal up and down. The other thing I want to let you know about CD57 is when it first came out, everyone thought if we followed it, we could use it to track how a person is doing. The reality is the research says otherwise now. Secondly, we thought that if we treated somebody long enough for it to get into normal range, those would be people that would not relapse. And the reality is it is not a predictor of who's going to relapse or when they're going to relapse. I find no usefulness in whether it's going to tell me when and who's going to relapse. So I don't even bother doing the test anymore, all right, because I don't think it does what we think it's supposed to do. I will occasionally do it for somebody that I have enough information that says Lyme. I'm not getting a positive test for Lyme, an antibody test, for instance, and I'm just looking for something else that gives me evidence it could be in them. I might do a CD57 in that situation, but I am, and you'll see there's a whole article I have on CD57 tests. I think I just am not a big believer in doing it because I think it gives false hope. sometimes, and also it does not an adequate predictor of who's going to relapse and who isn't going to relapse. So I don't do it, okay? All right, now, so what I can tell you is Lyme is in you. If you've been treated and you have a Herx on Banderol Cemento, that is a suggestion that Lyme is in you, and what you're getting is a Herx reaction. And so in terms of recommendations, I would use your Banderol Cemento. It sounds like it's working. You can use it as long as it keeps working. In terms of what that looks like, that means you could use it anywhere from 6 months to 9 months to even 12 months. As many of you know from earlier tonight, I like it. I think it works 85 to 90% of the time, that 2-herb combination. In terms of your Herxheimer reaction, you're not using anything that's really that great for Herx right now. The NAC can help, but what I would do for Herxing is get started on curcumin. I mentioned it earlier tonight, a 500 milligram 3 times a day. And if you're still Herxing through that, then I bump it up to 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day, okay? Those are some ideas for you, Bradley. Okay. Now that's a lot of discussion about CD57s, but I don't know why a lot of my colleagues still do them. I think they largely have been proven not to have much utility, and yet some of my colleagues still do them. Okay. Anyhow, thank you for that question, Bradley. Hello, Jim. Hi, Dr. Ross. Do you find Bactrim DS to be harsh on your patients? I keep hearing people do not tolerate it well. Does rifampin 600 milligrams per day mess with hormones? Every time I take it, 300 milligrams, I feel weaker. Okay, so both Bactrim and rifampin are drugs I like to use to treat Bartonella. Rifampin also has benefit in terms of treating intracellular Lyme and treating cyst Lyme. Okay, so about the Bactrim and you're feeling weaker. So rifampin, excuse me. So rifampin has a side effect list that is like 5 miles long. Okay, I mean it looks scary. If you take the handout that the pharmacist gives you about all the side effects, this one looks scary. The reality is, though, I only see side effects develop about 5% of the time on rifampin. And so although I tell people that they're going to be given this list that's 5 miles long, that the majority of people don't have problems. There is a couple things that I warn people about, though. Number one, rifampin can turn your urine orange. And number two, rifampin can lead to liver inflammation. All right. So usually after somebody's been on rifampin for about a month, I'm going to check their liver to see how they're handling it. The other thing I might do on rifampin is have somebody take something to protect the liver, like N-acetylcysteine, 500 milligrams 3 times a day, or glutathione as a the liposomal glutathione, that Trifortify Orange that I mentioned earlier tonight, 5 milliliters 1 time a day. I might do that, okay? Now, because rifampin can kill Lyme, you can sometimes get a Herxheimer reaction when you're on it, all right? So as many of you know, in a Herxheimer reaction, the immune system sees dead bug parts and toxins and makes more cytokines. So this increased fatigue you're having could be part of a Herx reaction from the rifampin killing Lyme, all right? Could be. Or it may be you have a side effect of sedation on the rifampin. Now, sometimes when people get side effects like this, I will still use it at the 300 milligrams because I think they still get benefit, but that's something to consider, okay? I don't find rifampin generally to cause hormonal problems. I just, that's not one of the things that I commonly see with it. In terms of Bactrim, about I think the studies, I looked at it this week, I think it's like 3% of people can have sulfa allergies or Bactrim allergies. Bactrim is a sulfa antibiotic. So one problem people can get with Bactrim is they can get allergies. Second thing is Bactrim sometimes can give nausea. It's a little hard on the stomach. But if you take it with food, most people actually can tolerate it. The third thing about Bactrim that Bactrim can do is it often can give more easy sunburning. Not quite as bad as like a doxycycline or a minocycline, the tetracyclines that really give bad sunburning, but this can sometimes increase your sunburning potential just a little bit, okay? So you should be aware of that with Bactrim. But generally, 95% of people tolerate Bactrim fine too, so I don't find it to be too harsh on my patients. I just that I got to warn them about being in sunshine, and I have to warn them also about taking it with food, okay? So generally people can tolerate it. unless they have allergic reactions, then we have to stop it. And Bactrim I don't use as a Lyme killer. I don't find that people get Herxheimer reactions on it. So if I'm wanting to use an antibiotic to treat Bartonella that I don't think is going to trigger a Herx, I would use Bactrim. All right. So anyhow, those are my ideas on that. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Or thank you, Jim, for that question. One last thing about Bartonella and about Lyme. Killing Lyme germs can give a Herx. Killing Bartonella does not cause a Herx. It just so happens that some of the antibiotics we use to kill Bartonella kill Lyme, and that gives you your Herx, okay? So I just want to clarify that one for everyone. All right. Thanks, Jim. And good luck to you. Hello, Sue. Is there a way to ensure that ticks avoid us? Probably not. I mean, there's the sprays you can use like DEET where you spray yourself. You can also soak clothing in something called permethrin. That is will ward them off. The trouble with DEET is it can be a neurotoxin though, and permethrin can be as well too. When you're out walking in areas where you might come into contact with ticks, which is really about anywhere these days, unfortunately, wear long pants and have your them tucked into the socks. That may be a way, but there isn't any way of assuring. Okay. And the big thing you want to do when you go into areas, potential areas where you could pick up ticks, is to do tick checks when you get back and make sure you don't have them. All right. Anyhow, those are some thoughts I have, Sue. One other thing that can sometimes actually might keep ticks away is volatile oils, things like oregano and thyme oil. The odor might keep ticks away, but boy, I don't know that I would hang my hat on those as being ways that are good prevention ways. Okay. Thank you, Sue. Let's see. Hello, Bob. Let's see. I have neurosymptoms with extreme anxiety and know I have high cortisol and high quinolinic acid based on recent tests. Are there specific ways to bring down the quinolinic acid? I am following much of your protocol. I hate fighting my extreme anxiety with the lorazepam each day. Okay, so first of all, in terms of, so everyone, quinolinic acid is a chemical that is toxic to the nerves in the brain, actually, made by the brain. It's made by immune cells in the brain, okay? So it's not good. One of the things that is good at bringing quinolinic acid down is curcumin. Curcumin can help alleviate that. I would be on 500 milligrams 3 times a day. That's one way to do it. Resveratrol, actually, from Japanese knotweed and resveratrol is another way to bring it down. Okay, but I usually just use the curcumin because you get a good anti-cytokine with that as well too. Now, I'm a bit more concerned though about why you're having this anxiety. It's probably not from the quinolinic acid. So both Lyme and Bartonella can give pervasive, unrelenting anxiety. So Bob, and if they haven't treated you for Bartonella, I would look into being treated for Bartonella. Babesia also can give anxiety, but Babesia anxiety tends to be more panic attacks, anxiety that comes out of nowhere, not provoked, not brought on by stress, versus Bartonella anxiety just tends to be this ongoing, pervasive, in your face, always kind of anxiety. So if that's what's happening in your treatment, make sure that they thought about treating Bartonella with you, okay? All right. And for ideas about how to treat Bartonella, take a look at my article in the infection treatment plan chapter of the Treat Lyme book called Kills Bartonella, a Brief Guide. Okay. That'll give you some good ideas on the regimens I recommend to treat Bartonella. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Bob. Let's see. I'm just cleaning some things out here, everyone. Hello, John. Let's see here. Hello, I have mast cell activation syndrome, Hashimoto's, and now after 8 years, undiagnosed Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella. I have reacted in the past to minocycline and recently amoxicillin very severely. can you successfully treat somebody so sensitive without antibiotics? Yeah, you can. Well, let me rephrase that. You're going to have to be on some germ killers, okay? So one thing you could do that's germ killing is prescription antibiotics, and I hear of your sensitivities here. Another thing you could do is herbal antimicrobials, and for Lyme, the Banderol Cemento I mentioned works 85 to 90% of the time. For Bartonella, you can use a combination of something called Sida acuta and Houtunia. I write about that in my Kills Bartonella article. Those work about 70% of the time. And then Babesia, there's two herbs that can work. One is called artemisinin, and the other one called Cryptolepis, and they can work around 80-ish% of the time. And you would find information about that in my article called Kills Babesia, a brief guide, okay? Now, the one thing that you also might want to consider, given the immune system problems you have, is starting on something called low-dose naltrexone. So low-dose naltrexone is a endorphin narcotic blocker. It's manufactured as a 50 milligram pill, and it's used for people with drug overdoses, okay? It binds to narcotic receptors, which are also known as endorphin receptors. Now, endorphins that we make them naturally on our own, regulate pain, but they also regulate the immune system. And so what we can do is give you an endorphin blocker, which is naltrexone. And as it wears, and so what happens in that situation is the brain doesn't like it that the endorphin sites in the body are blocked. And it starts sending out a bunch of signals to the cells that produce endorphins, telling them to produce more. And what can happen is then when the naltrexone wears off those endorphin sites, those sites get flooded with a lot of endorphins. And that has the effect of re-regulating an immune system that's overactive, either having mast cell activation or autoimmune illness like Hashimoto's, okay? And even Lyme can have an autoimmune component to it too. Now, it's called low-dose naltrexone because it's manufactured as a 50 milligram pill, but when we use it to regulate the immune system, we want a temporary blockade, all right? So we dose it beginning at 1.5 milligrams one time a day, and after 2 weeks, we increase it to 2 pills one time a day, and then eventually up to 4.5 milligrams one time a day after another 2 weeks, okay? You can take it in I have people take it in the morning, although you'll find information online where it says to take it at night. But if you take it at night, it often will keep you awake. So I have people take it in the morning, and it works quite well. Give it a trial to see if it will decrease some of your sensitivities, actually, and you'll know within 2 months whether it can be helpful with you in terms of your symptoms or not, okay? So those are just some things to think about. The other thing, when I got a person that's really sensitive to medications that I'm going to wonder about is if they have a detoxification problem called MTHFR. That stands for methotetrahydrofolate reductase. You can find an article about MTHFR in my detoxification chapter, okay? Look at that article to see if you might have MTHFR, how you test for it, and the steps you can take to reverse it, because you might want to do that, because people that have this detoxification problem called MTHFR often will have problems with medicine sensitivity as well, okay? So let me go ahead and, last thing, if you can't even tolerate the herbal germ killers, then you might want to look at an experimental way of treating your germs, which is to use electromagnetic frequencies, commonly used, something called a Rife machine. Now, I want to let you know, I cannot prescribe Rife machines in my office because the Food and Drug Administration forbids me from doing it, because we don't have human safety studies that show that it works, nor do we have studies that show that it works, okay? But what I can tell you is based on my experience of people that do this on their own, when I don't recommend it, because I never recommend it, because I can't, because the FDA may shut me down. So anyone that's listening in from the FDA tonight, I'm not recommending Rifing, but Rifing seems to work 60% of the time based on the experience of my patients that do this on their own. And the idea behind Rifing is that it will generate, it's a machine that generates electromagnetic frequencies that resonate with the covering of your germs in a way that will burst them. Much like you could take a singer and put them in front of a glass of water and they were to sing with a frequency that vibrates that glass and bursts the glass, you can do the same thing with a Rife machine, okay? If you're looking for information about rifing, Google the name Brian Rosner and Rife, B-R-Y-A-N, and the last name is R-O-S-N-E-R. He has a good book that's a resource on rifing in Lyme. And then about the various frequencies you can use to rife. There's an author, a PhD named Nina Silver. Nina has written a book called the Lyme Frequency Handbook, okay, where she talks about the rife frequency handbook, where she describes various frequencies that you can use to kill various kinds of germs. And that might be something also for you to think about, John, okay? All right, so John, I'm going to do a screen share here. I'm going to show you a few things. Actually, I'm going to show everyone a few things. Okay, so we're back in the Treat Lyme book here. In terms of detoxification, take a look over here at the detoxification chapter. And in here, I talk about, this is the MTHFR article that you might want to take a look at, okay? So I would start with that. In terms of the low-dose naltrexone article, you're going to want to look in the chapter on the immune system. And I think I got it in here. There it is. It's this article called On Low-Dose Naltrexone on Lyme, Does It Help? And take a look there. It gives you some input on that as well, too. Okay. All right. And I think those were the big ideas that I wanted to point out to you in here. While I'm here, I'm just going to show you. This is the supplement store that my patients get their supplements from. The reason you might want to consider this is we've chosen products that have great active ingredients. We've chosen companies that do a good job of sourcing for the supplements to find the most active ingredient. Secondly, most of the things we choose here are not using artificial fillers that could be hurtful to somebody with Lyme whose system is already overwhelmed just dealing with the environment, okay? So if you're looking for the products I recommend for N-acetylcysteine, for instance, you'll find it here. So you could literally use the search function up here, write N-acetylcysteine or write glutathione or write curcumin in here, and you'll see the products that we carry. You can also go ahead and search for them on our site by doing supplements by medical problem. So for instance, this is the one on biofilms. I still have to add the stevia here, but you'll find here the lumber kinase and the cemento and the banderol. We got two companies that make lumber kinase. One's called Baluki and this other one called lumber kinase by Allergy Research, okay? So anyhow, just take a look here and realize anytime you support, make purchases through our store, you're actually supporting the Treat Lyme book and you're supporting these free webinars that I run each week as well too, all right? So we appreciate that support. Let me go back here again. All right, so John, thank you and good luck. John, the other thing you might want to consider, because your problem is complex and I probably have hit on some of the big topics, is many of you may be aware I have an online consult service as well too, where I actually will visit with people online. Actually, I'll show you how to access that. And what I do with these online visits, so this is the home page of the Treat Lyme book. Right here, this is where I briefly describe the online visit, or you can use the link up here. It's called Online Consult. And it's through this service that I can actually design treatments for you. Now, you want to make sure you read all about how it works and take a look at our disclaimer and the requirements, okay? But essentially, this is something you do online. And although I can't, when we do it, I am unable to prescribe for you because I have to physically examine somebody according to my state licensing board to prescribe. I can tell you what to do though. And you can take it if you need prescriptions to a physician who hopefully will enact it for you, or many of the ideas I come up with actually are herbal and you can put them into play even without the help of a physician, okay? So anyhow, I'll point that out. John, that's something you might want to consider. Others, that's something you might want to consider as well too, all right? All right, let me move on here. Thank you for that question, John, and good luck to you with all of this. Hello, Bev. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I was recently diagnosed with Borrelia and Bartonella after 3 years. I'm on 2 times clarithromycin, 250 milligram, 2 times a day. Detox protocol, including lumber kinase, herbs from Beyond Balance, Farm for Red Sauna, and the PK protocol with oral membrane stabilizing drink. What are the critical things for me to get right, please? So I'm concerned that your treatment is not treating Bartonella and you are inadequately treating your Lyme germ. All right. So in terms of treating Lyme, again, we recognize that there are 3 forms of the germ. The clarithromycin that you're on here is going to be at treating both intracellular and spirochete Lyme, but it's doing nothing for the cyst form of the germ. Clarithromycin can help treat Bartonella, but it needs to be combined with a Bartonella, another better antibiotic for treating Bartonella. So for instance, clarithromycin I might combine with rifampin, I might combine with Bactrim that I mentioned earlier tonight, but you're missing something to treat your Bartonella effectively here too, all right? One simple way that you can turn this into a full Bart treatment as well as a better Lyme treatment is to add the prescription called rifampin, because it treats intracellular and cyst Lyme. It also is a great drug to treat Bartonella. So you might consider doing that, 300 milligrams, 2 pills 1 time a day. Your practitioners may be thinking that something in the Beyond Balance, because I think Beyond Balance has a Babesia and a Bartonella and Lyme herb mix. The trouble is the Beyond Balance mixes are actually more immune boosting, but they don't kill. And so I would not rely on anything from Beyond Balance to do your germ killing for you, okay? The other thing I would add, excuse me, is you need to lower your cytokines. I would get on curcumin. I would actually, Bev, what I'm going to do rather than going through the rest of this, take a look at the successful treatment recipe, my Lyme disease treatment protocol, for ideas I have about sleep, lowering cytokines, balancing out your adrenals and your thyroid. Make sure you're doing those key steps as well too, in addition to the steps you're taking here, and expand your antibiotics. You're just not effective enough with what you're doing here with your antibiotics. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Bev, and thank you for that question. Good luck. Hello, Val. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Husband being treated for Lyme Bart Bab for 2 months with Zithromax daily and alternate days with atovaquone or rifampin. Now getting weird rashes. The blood, tiny blood red dots, small stretch marks, mottled streaks, and today 3 raised blood blisters. Any thoughts about what could be going on? I'm not sure about, well, so for just one comment, I guess I would need to see the rashes a little bit more to know for sure, but just an observation. Your Bartonella and Babesia replicate fast, and I am not a believer in doing alternating days of antibiotics for those. I think you can pulse your antibiotics days on, days off for treating Lyme, but not for Bartonella and not for Babesia. I would actually pick one of your co-infections first and treat it, get it cleaned out, and then go after the other one. And generally, what I'm going to treat first is Bartonella. And then after 4 to 6 months, when we got that out, then I'm going to turn and start treating the Babesia. All right. These blood red dots you're describing, and even maybe the blood blisters, is Babesia. And he's not being adequately treated for it right now. Because he's not taking the atovaquone every day, all right? The rifampin would be the main agent for Bartonella, helped by Zithromax, and again, that's every other day. So he's not being adequately treated for Bartonella either. Burrascano, a colleague of mine that no longer treats Lyme, but was one of the pioneers of Lyme treatment, saw in his practice that when people had both Bartonella and Babesia, that it was more important to treat Bartonella first, because if you went after Babesia first, it was harder to get the Bartonella out, okay? So generally, that is the approach that I wind up using. I would change this regimen to a rifampin Zithromax daily regimen. Go after your Bartonella, or your, to a Zithromax rifampin daily regimen, go after your Bartonella and your Lyme, and in 4 to 6 months, when you get that cleared out, then I would start going after your Babesia. That stretch mark rash that you're getting is Bartonella. All right, so you're just not doing service to either one of them, because at least that's my opinion. You're not being adequately treated because of the way the antibiotics are being altered around. Okay, all right. Good luck, Val. I wish him well. Hello, Stephanie. Let's see. I have been on Zithromax and Mepron for 3 months treating Babesia. I feel a lot worse now when I was not being than when I was not being treated. Any suggestions? I feel like stopping antibiotic treatment, as I have heard that bacteria become resistant. My worst symptom is my heart has been pounding. So Stephanie, there's a few things I think about when I see somebody getting worse on antibiotics. Number one is Herxheimer reaction. Although 3 months in, usually a Herxheimer will have lifted by now. But one thing you want to do is make sure you're doing things to lower the Herx, lower the cytokines made in Herx. And that is, I would be on curcumin 500 milligrams 3 times a day. The second thing I wonder about when somebody's getting worse as being treated is if they happen to have a detox problem, either MTHFR or they're one of the people that cannot get rid of Lyme and or mold toxins. So take a look at the 2 articles in the Treat Lyme book about MTHFR and the other one on Lyme and mold toxicity. And I would also consider, Stephanie, taking a look at the basic Lyme. Let's see, in that detoxification chapter, you will find, I think, an article called Detoxification 101, the basic steps of detox. Make sure that detox is being handled, okay? Third thing that can happen when people are not getting better is, as a result of being on antibiotics, it can trigger too many yeast in the intestines. And too many yeast in the intestines release toxins that make you feel worse. They also trigger excess cytokines to be made. So take a look at the successful treatment recipe, my Lyme disease treatment protocol, for the tool that I have in there to help figure out if you have too many yeast. And if you do, then take a look at the chapter on yeast, the yeast chapter, for the steps you would take to actually kill yeast and get them out, okay? Those are some thoughts. If you would like a more thorough input, because this is pretty complex, take a look at the one-to-one medical consult that I was talking about earlier. These are the kind of situations that sometimes it's helpful if I can just sit down and look at things with you. I can come up with a clearer picture about what the real problem is, okay? But those are 3 things to think about: cytokines, too many yeast, and detoxification problems, okay? All right. All right. Good luck to you, Stephanie. Good. Yeah, I hope things turn around for you. All right. All right, everyone. That's it for me for tonight. As many of you know, Halo and Thor, my 2 Basenjis, come to work with me, and they are looking at me, and they're requesting their walk of the evening. Some of you may have heard tonight there was some coughing going on in the background. That's Thor. Thor has decided to get some kind of a respiratory thing here, so I'm going to have to get him home and take care of him here in a little bit as well, too. It's been good visiting with you all tonight. We have another one of these next week, and then I'm going to take actually, you know what? I'm not going to have one of these next week. I made a mistake. I'm at a conference next week, so I won't be here on Wednesday to do the webinar. I made a mistake. So those of you that signed up for next week, I apologize. I will think about what I'm going to do about that. I probably will move and have one the week following. Pay attention to your email tomorrow. I will, in that email, I will talk about my plans for future webinars. But next week is off. I apologize for that. But in the email tomorrow, I will have a link to signing up for the next ones when they begin, okay, which will probably be not next week, but the week after. You will get an email tomorrow morning that describes, that does have information in it about the recording being done. And so take a look at that. And here in a second, I'm just getting ready to send you over to the treatlyme.net, to the Lyme book, the Treat Lyme book. When you get there, if you want to subscribe to help support the work that we're doing, click on any article you want to read. And within the article will be a screen that says subscribe, okay? So if you subscribe, I appreciate it. That helps the work that we're doing with these free webinars and even the webinar recordings that we put out. And also it helps give me resources to keep spending time developing new articles as well too. All right. So good night, everyone. It's been good being here with you tonight. I look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. Bye-bye.